Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Profound. Today is a special episode because I'm going to be going back into the PowerPoint format, and I have a subject that I don't know if everyone here is familiar with, but it's a really important subject when it comes down to spiritual science, and it's called sacred geometry. And these are the patterns of nature, the mind, and consciousness. This can show us profound insights into many different areas of life, and some of the smartest people ever were the most interested in this sort of sacred geometry. Alright, so let's jump into it. So you might be asking, what is sacred geometry? Sacred geometry explores shape-like circles and spirals that hold deep meaning. From nature to ancient temples, these patterns reflect a universe's structure. In this video, we'll see how they connect our minds to something greater. So what I'm going to be going over in this presentation is I'm going to start with core geometric patterns and ratios, and then I'm going to move on to the flower of life and its derived structures, and then next I'm going to talk about the Plutonic solids, and then nature's geometric manifestations onto the visual cortex and geometric perception, how your brain uses geometry for perception, and ancient civilizations, philosophers, and Da Vinci, and then we'll be finishing with what connects consciousness and geometry. So starting off with core geometric patterns, obviously you learn these. These are the basics in school, your plane shapes and your solid shapes. We have some simple shapes like circles, squares, triangles, spirals, and their symmetry creates harmony, setting the stage for complex patterns like the flower of life, which we'll explore later. So, if you've ever seen this spiral, I think it looks familiar, and it's called the golden ratio. It's about 1.618 and creates proportions that feel naturally beautiful and are seen in nature. It's in the nautilus shells, it's in art, it's in architecture, and it's a key to understanding the patterns of the flower of life. And it represents the balance, growth, and universal order. So the golden ratio in art and architecture, you can see it's used in some iconic works, as you can see the Mona Lisa, in the Parthenon, and in some modern designs as well. And it just creates a visually pleasing proportion that feels intuitive. And this just shows how our universe is kind of a basic code, and this is just one of the constants that's put into it. As you can see, it creates this like symmetry and harmony, and you can see how nature encompass it as well in the upcoming slide. So if you've ever heard about the Fibonacci sequence, this is how we're building the spiral. So we start with a 0, a 1, a 1, and then a 2, and then a 3, and then a 5, and then an 8, and then a 13, and then a 21. So it's each number is the sum of the two preceding. And the ratios of consecutive Fibonacci numbers approach the golden ratio, as you can see the similarity. And it forms spirals seen in nature, like the sunflowers and galaxies. And I think there's more examples on the next slide as well. So what's the connection between the Fibonacci and the golden ratio? So the Fibonacci spirals approximate the golden ratio spirals. And you can see them in sunflower seeds, the animal patterns, and even galaxies. This connection just shows the mathematical patterns that drive organic growth and beauty across the universe. As you can see on the picture on the left, you see the hurricane and the galaxy, and you can see these spirals that are formed from nature. So now we're going to do an introduction into the flower of life, which is one of the most ancient symbols in civilization. As you can see on the right, these are all pictures of the flower of life from ancient civilizations. And basically, the flower of life is a pattern of overlapping circles forming a hexagonal grid. It's found in ancient sites from Egypt to China, and it symbolizes creation and the interconnectedness of all things. And then I'm going to show you guys how the flower of life is formed and why why it's so important. So, the formation of the flower of life, it starts with one single circle representing unity. And then now we have two circles overlapping, which forms the Vesia Pisces. And you can kind of see on the right side how it mirrors cellular division, and it's like the cell is expanding and multiplying into two. It's just the same thing with circles. It's just you're adding a circle and it's creating overlapping patterns. So the additional circles 7, 13, 19 create the full pattern. And you can see on the right how it looks like an embryo, how the flower of life is formed. So you can see how there's that connection between the geometry and the physical manifestation of it. So as we're building the flower of life, we create the seed of life, which is 7 overlapping circles, which you can link to the 7 chakras or the 7 days of creation as well. And it's the foundation for other sacred shapes, and you can see how it's formed in the top, how it creates this seed of life. So now we're adding more circles, and we're going to get from the flower of life comes the tree of life. And this is a Kabbalistic symbol with 10 or 11 nodes representing spiritual growth, and this is a big symbol in Judaism. And other patterns include the egg of life and the fruit of life, which is 13 circles. And you can see in these pictures over here, I'm sure you've seen this symbol on the right. It's a blueprint to spiritual growth in the Judaistic culture, and they use geometry to explain it. Now we're going to talk about Metatron's cube, which is it's built from the fruit of life's 13 circles, which we just saw, and it contains all 5 plutonic solids, which we will go into. And by connecting their centers, it forms a cosmic blueprint, symbolizing the universe's underlying structure. And you can see on the right Metatron's cube. You may have seen this symbol before. It basically encompasses the information to create the 5 perfect shapes, which are tied to elements. So it's basically it symbolizes the field of information that everything is coming from. And here's we'll do an introduction to the platonic solids. And the platonic solids are 5 perfect shapes with equal faces, edges, and angles. There's the tetrahedron, there's the cube, the octahedron, the dodecahedron, and the icosahedron. And these are all found in Metatron's cube, and they symbolize universal principles and connect to nature and philosophy. As you can see on the right, you can see how they're formed by the overlapping triangles, and how they're turned in 3-dimensional from the 2-dimensional shapes, just the triangles and the squares and the hexagons. So you might be wondering, like, what's the significance with the platonic solids? Like, why do these matter? They matter because they're basically the building blocks of reality. These are the shapes that create everything else. You can see platonic solids are mathematically perfect, with all vertices touching a sphere. They appear in crystals, viruses, and sacred designs, representing cosmic order and linking the flower of life to the physical world. As you can see, the viruses take the shape of the icosahedrons, and you can see the different crystals that are in the different shapes of the platonic solids, as these are fundamental building blocks of the universe. So as I said, there are elemental associations with the flower of life and the 5 plutonic solids. And the tetrahedron represents fire, the cube for earth, the octahedron for air, the dodecahedron for ether, and the icosahedron for water. And these links show how geometry connects to the building blocks of reality. As you can see in the picture in the top left, you can see Metatron's cube, and you can see how it creates each of the plutonic solids, the shapes for them on the left side, and the elements that go with each, which is the famous philosopher Plato. I mean, this is his creation, and these are the elements that he linked each to. Okay, now we're going to jump into cymatics, which is essential for this lesson. As we've been talking about geometry and symmetry, we can actually see how sound creates shape. As you can see on the right, this is what sand looks like on a vibrating plate. And different frequencies create different shapes. So cymatics, they reveal how sound vibrations create stunning geometric patterns. It was first noticed by Leonardo da Vinci in the 1400s when dust formed shapes on a vibrating table, and it was later studied by Hans Jenny in the 60s. By vibrating plates or liquids, the sand on the Chladni plate or water, cymatics make sound visible as intricate designs. These patterns echo sacred geometry, suggesting a deep connection between sound, form, and the universe's order. So, we're going to see how these shapes emerge. So, cymatics produces patterns like hexagons, stars, and mandalas, eerily similar to the flower of life or the Platonic solids. Different frequencies shape these forms. Low frequencies create simple patterns, while higher ones form intricate designs. In water, you see hexagonal grids. On sand, radial symmetry emerge. These patterns suggest sound could be a creative force, shaping nature's geometry in ways that mirror sacred patterns we've explored. And we can also see how these music notes show geometry on the right. So each of these is a different key, and you can see the geometry formed by the sound. So everything has this sort of shape and internal structure. So cymatics and sacred geometry are deeply linked. Cymatic patterns mirror shapes like the flower of life, suggesting sound follows the same universal laws. And many traditions see sound as a creative force, like the word in ancient texts. Artists and musicians like Nigel Stanford use cymatics to create visual art, while architects draw on these patterns for harmony. This hints at a profound connection between vibration, form, and even consciousness. So, we're going to look in geometry and the natural world. I mean, I think we've went over this a little bit, but we can see the hexagons in the honeycombs, and you can see the spirals in the shell and the sunflower and the galaxies, and this just shows that how geometry has this role of creating this shape and form around us, which we can link to other processes later. I think we already went over this a bit, but the spirals in nature, you can see it in the snail, the galaxy, you can see it in hurricanes, and you can see this cosmic proportion that is manifested in this physical world. And then we can go over the fractals in nature. As I was talking about for scale earlier, fractals are just a representation of something at a different scale. So as you can see these branches of neurons on the right side, this kind of looks like the cosmic web of the universe. And if you can see the picture in the middle on the top, and how it's the brachials of the lungs and it's the branches of the trees, how they look eerily similar, and how we produce what the trees breathe and they produce what we breathe. So you can see the interconnectedness of all this. You can see the branching patterns in tree stumps, and you can see the branching patterns in rivers. You can see it in your blood. You can see it in your neurons. And it just shows how everything has this connected form and pattern, and follows these simple rules. So, we'll go over to some symmetry in biology. So we have these two types of symmetry. So symmetry is what is the hallmark of life. It's what creates like this aesthetic, and you just multiply one side to the other side. And even when you see people that are more attractive, their faces are more symmetrical. It's just more visually pleasing. So butterflies, they have bilateral symmetry, while flowers and starfish show radial symmetry. And you can see examples of this on the picture. You can see how the beetle, if you split it in half, it looks the same, and how if you split the starfish in those different directions in the radial symmetry, it creates equal shapes. And these patterns just reflect evolutionary efficiency and balance, and shows how geometry shapes the world that lives around us. We can even see these types of shapes in the building blocks of structure, as you can see the tetrahedron and the octahedron in the forming of crystals like pyrite, which form perfect geometric shapes, some representing Platonic solids. These structures suggest that geometry isn't just an idea, it's a blueprint for the physical world, from minerals to molecules. So now we're gonna go into how your brain uses geometry to form what you see in front of your eyes. Our brain's visual cortex is in the occipital lobe, which is in the back of your brain, and it's what processes the shapes, the patterns, and motion. It's the key to understanding why geometric patterns captivate us and how they might connect to deeper aspects of our mind. I want to talk about how our visual cortexes actually work. Our visual cortex has 6 layers. First is the V1, your vision 1, which this is what detects your basic edges, like edges on like a table, a wall, and angles. And then while higher layers piece together these complex shapes. So when you are in V1, all this visual cortex sees are the edges and the angles of everything, which is what starts to create the structure. So as it goes down, it becomes more complex and more complex. So when you are at the top, just the first visual input is just shapes. It's geometry, and your brain creates this map of this geometry, which is what you see in front of you. Your brain goes from just these edges and shapes, and it creates these neural pathways that have a connection with the physical manifestation of matter. And so the higher layers, these piece together complex shapes, and this what shows why sacred geometry feels so intuitive, because it's wired into our brains. Neurons in our visual cortex are tuned to specific angles and lines. Sacred geometry patterns like spirals or grids align with these neural responses and create a sense of harmony that almost feels instinctive. And you can see these shapes. These are symmetrical shapes that are formed in your brain. This one picture on the left is stained neurons, and these are like a symmetrical. You can see how our neurons create geometry, and on the right side is what this visual input looks to us. This is the geometric input that we get, and we turn into the shapes and the people that we see, which is pretty crazy to think about, that it's just shapes and we turn it into this with our brain. Our brain's the machine that uses the consciousness and creates physical matter. Our brains are like a computer. We recognize patterns and we recognize symmetry, and this is how we do our logical processing. Our brains are wired to spot symmetry and repetition. That's why sacred geometry like mandalas grab our attention and sharpen our focus. These patterns can even evoke aesthetic or spiritual experiences. So brain scans show symmetrical patterns that light up the visual cortex. As you can see, the visual cortex is lit up in the back. These geometric shapes don't just catch our eye, they influence our emotions and hint at a deeper link between perception and thought. And I think that's a good segue to get out of how our brain processes it, and we can go back to our ancestors and see how they use this sacred math and this sacred knowledge in their structures. So ancient cultures wove sacred geometry into their creation. Egypt's pyramids used the golden ratio, Greece's Parthenon followed perfect proportions, India crafted intricate mandalas, and the Mayan temples aligned with cosmic patterns. Geometry was their language of meaning. Egypt's pyramids, like those of Giza, align with the stars and embody ratios like the golden ratio and pi. They weren't just tombs, they symbolized cosmic order, blending practical engineering with spiritual significance. And if these cultures back then knew about these cosmic proportions, then there's something divine just about that, and how it's kind of ingrained into everything that is to be. Pythagoras, he created the Pythagorean theorem, and he's famous Greek and ancient Greek thinker. He saw numbers and geometry as divine. His school studied the tetraiaces, a 10-point triangle symboling creation, and his ideas laid the foundation for blending math and mysticism. And he created this sort of segue between spiritualism and science, and used this triangle as an explanation for the cosmic order. Plato, who created the Platonic solids, In his work, the Timaeus, he tied the Platonic solids to these elements, seeing geometry as a bridge between physical and divine. His ideas shaped Western philosophy, making geometry a key understanding of the cosmos. Da Vinci, as you might have heard, the Virtuoso man, he wove geometry into his art and his science, and he used the golden ratio, and in the De Divina Proportion, he explored Platonic solids, blending beauty, math, and nature. And I think one thing I can also add is Leonardo da Vinci's captivation with the flower of life. He spent his whole life trying to decode the flower of life and what its meaning was and how it was connected to consciousness and divinity. And Da Vinci, the Renaissance man he is, was looking into these geometric patterns as the foundation of life and the foundation of the information that's given to us. So that's why it was so important to him. And I can show how other cultures use as geometry as well. Some Islamic mosques, this one in Iran is beautiful, and the Chinese Feng Shui, it uses geometric harmony, and Native American medicine wheels, they reflect radial patterns, all showing geometry's universal role in meaning making. So this geometry is a connection with meaning, and that's something sacred and cannot be taken away from people. So now I want to go into the connection between sacred geometry and religion. And I'm going to go into each religion and what the connection between sacred geometry is. So in Christianity, sacred geometry reflects divine order. The circles symbolize eternity, and triangles represent the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Gothic cathedrals like Chartres use geometric designs in rose windows and cruciform layouts to evoke spiritual harmony. As I talked about, sound creates shape, and they're using the organ. So the organ is creating this geometry that's beautiful and creates this connection between everyone in the church as well. And cymatics, so the carvings in the Rosslyn Temple represent vibrational patterns, hinting at sound's role in creation, as in the beginning was the Word. In the Bible, they say, in the beginning was the Word. And these patterns suggest geometry and vibration are tools to express God's perfect order, linking the physical and divine. So we're going to go into sacred geometry and Judaism. We already talked about the Kabbalistic tree of life a little bit, but Judaism embraces sacred geometry through the Kabbalistic tree of life, mapping spiritual growth. The Star of David, symbolizing unity of matter and spirit, as you can see each element, and it creates the connection that is the Star of David. The synagogue designs and the Torah's numerical patterns like gematria, which is a math that can be formed from the Bible to actually predict events. As you can see on the right, there's a code for each Hebrew symbol in the Bible. And I think you can go on geometria.com and search up stuff on it. Cymatics fits here with vibrational patterns, echoing the tree of life's harmonistic structure, suggesting sound as the divine connector. Together, geometry and vibration in Jewish mysticism guide practitioners towards understanding the universe's unity and their place within it. Okay, sacred geometry and Hinduism. In Hinduism, sacred geometry shapes spiritual practice through mandalas, which we talked about earlier, and Sri Yantra, tools for meditation and cosmic connection. Temple designs follow Vastu Shastra, aligning with universal patterns, and cymatic ties with Om, the primordial sound believed to create the universe. As you can see on the left is the meaning of Om and how this sound encompasses the universal sound. And it's used in a lot of meditation. Texts like the Agamas guide geometric temple layouts to embody divine harmony. And together, geometry and sound, as in Nada Brahma, reflects the cosmos' creation and guides devotees towards spiritual unity. As you can see, a lot of these cultures are using geometry as this way to represent the divine and this way to connect with people, as it's shown because God created and this divine world that is shaped with geometry. So if you were to connect with God, you can use geometry. So this is what these religions are doing, and they're using geometry to explain concepts as well, and how energy is formed. Sacred geometry in Buddhism. That Buddhism also, I think, does the Om and in mandalas, and it represents the universe's order and impermanence. as you can see, the wheel of life and death, and cymatic patterns formed by vibration represent these mandalas, suggesting sound shapes cosmic harmony, and they use this in meditation. And this is what deepens the Buddhist spiritual practice and leads to enlightenment, is geometry. The last religion I'll go over is sacred geometry in Islam, which is they use in their artwork and their mosque. The cymatics, they use vibrational patterns to align with intricate geometric tiles, and you can see how it reflects divine infinity. And the symbolism is geometry as a sound as expressions of Allah's perfect order. So now we're going to go to the final topic, the geometry and consciousness, and what's the connection between geometry and consciousness. We already talked about how our brains, all we do is see shapes, which is inform our consciousness, which our consciousness creates our brain creates a map out of this. So could geometry reflect the structure of consciousness? And Da Vinci thought the flower of life was the symbol that represented consciousness. Patterns like mandalas and fractals might represent universal archetypes, as Carl Jung suggested with his collective unconscious, and these shapes may hold clues to how our minds work, as we can use geometry to map our minds and our thought processes, and we experience geometry every day, and just look around. Everything is shaped a certain way, and what's visually pleasing and what's visually not pleasing. As I talked about, meditation geometry, people use mandalas to focus on while they're meditating. People even meditate to sound, so sound creates shape, which can put you into altered states of consciousness as well. And visual cortex's response enhances this spiritual experience. So we can go into some modern perspectives on geometry and sacred geometry. So modern science sees geometry's impact on cognition and neuroscience, and even in quantum physics where subatomic patterns emerge. Esoteric traditions go further, viewing geometry as a language of the soul, connecting mind and matter. And you can see right here the different types of geometric shapes the hydrogen wave functions make. So we can bridge science and spirituality. Sacred geometry bridges these two, and our visual cortex processes these patterns, but our consciousness gives them meaning. And this interplay invites us to explore the deeper structures of reality, blending observation with insight. And sacred geometry isn't just ancient, it's thriving today. Architects use geometric patterns like in India's Lotus Temple for eco-friendly, harmonious designs. Digital artists incorporate the flower of life for stunning visuals, and cymatics-inspired music visualizations like Nigel Stanford's work. Meditation apps use mandalas to promote mindfulness and wellness, and these applications show how sacred geometry enhances aesthetics, supports mental health, and even informs technology, connecting timeless patterns to our modern lives. And you can see even Terrence Howard, his linchpin technology, which is recently coming out. He uses the flower of life and the negative space between it to create these drones that can interlap with each other with divine proportion. So sacred geometry ties together nature, the mind, and spirit. The flower of life, Plutonic solids, and cymatics reveal universal principles, while ancient wisdom, religious traditions, and modern science show their timeless relevance. From Catholic windows to quantum patterns, geometry is everywhere. You can see the spirals, the symmetries, the mandalas, they're all around you. This journey just shows how the patterns connect us to the cosmos. And some of my final thoughts is geometry is a window into reality structure, and these symbols have been around for centuries and millennium, and the ancients have knowledge that we don't even know the half of. And what this geometry, it blends the science, the art, and the philosophy, and invites us to explore how these patterns shape our world and our minds. How do you see sacred geometry in your life? Maybe in nature or art? But I think that's enough for me for today. I think if you want to hear about topics like this, I want to hear more from you guys, because this was a little different. This is even different than the light one, because this is a little more niche. But I hope you can understand the importance of sacred geometry and how you can even apply it in your life, drawing the flower of life, connecting yourself to this divine proportion. And I want to thank you, and I'm out.